All right, let's try this one more time. God, it's already burning. This is a lot harder than it seems like it's going to be. Oh my God. I can feel the tears welling up. Ah, ah, is it an hour yet? No, screw this. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out the introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what we usually do at the Horror Movie Syllabus. In short, it's we take a look at a particular subgenre of horror, and then we pick 3 movies from that subgenre to explore. But this is our Is It Syllabus-Worthy series, where I take a recommendation from you guys, from comments that you guys have left on previous videos, and I watch that movie not knowing much of anything about it, and then decide, is it syllabus worthy? Is it worthy of making it onto the horror movie syllabus? Today's movie that we're talking about is a movie called Butterfly Kisses. And Butterfly Kisses was recommended by my good friend Sarah, aka the Rose Bride, in the comments below. And she recommended this under our mockumentary video, so it gives me a hint that it's a mockumentary movie. And actually, I went back and reread her comment after watching this movie, and God bless her, she did a really good job of explaining this movie without spoiling it out of context. Like, when you've seen the movie and you read her comment, it feels like she's spoiling it, but if you read it beforehand, which I had done, it doesn't spoil anything, because if you don't know what the movie's about, it doesn't make a lot of sense what she's saying in terms of spoilers. So great job, Sarah, for not spoiling it, because I think this movie was at its best when it was surprising me. And it surprised me, it did, in both good ways and in bad ways. Or maybe a better way of saying it is that some of its strengths also wound up being some of its weaknesses too. But we're going to get into that as we go through the movie. And what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick movie review of it, tell you what I liked about it, tell you what I didn't like about it, and then we'll tackle the question, is it syllabus worthy? So why don't we go ahead and get into that movie review right now. Like I said, the movie that we're talking about today is Butterfly Kisses. Butterfly Kisses came out in 2018 and is directed by Eric Christopher Myers, who also appears in the movie. And it's a mockumentary style found footage movie, doing both actually. We'll get into that. And it really is a good example of how both of those subgenres tend to overlap. We've talked about them previously. Found footage is movies that are ostensibly about footage that was found somewhere, and mockumentaries are kind of faux documentaries, and a lot of the movies that we see in those subgenres kind of overlap. They do a little bit of both. This movie's definitely doing both, and that's one of its biggest strengths, and one of its biggest weaknesses too. But we're going to get into that, like I said, in just a minute. First, if you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a filmmaker and his crew, who are following another filmmaker who has found some footage of another filmmaker who is exploring this urban legend slash myth of a creature or an entity known as Peeping Tom, or sometimes called Mr. Blink or Blinky. And they were trying to prove his existence, and he's trying to prove that they proved their existence. And this other documentary film crew, which is what we're watching, is kind of exploring this particular filmmaker, his motives, and whether or not he's on the up and up. And I'll stop there so as to not spoil things too much for you, but this is where the movie's biggest strength lies, is in this really super mega meta take on the material. As pretty much all horror fans know, the found footage subgenre has been kind of done to death, and it's really hard to make something feel fresh and original. The mockumentary subgenre, which I tend to differentiate just because I think it is a slightly different thing, tends to be a little bit more fresh because it's more of the documentary style thing. But with so many real documentaries on things like Netflix and stuff like that, it kind of also feels oversaturated. So it's really hard for these horror movies to do something that is a little bit more fresh and original. And this one did a great job of trying to find a fresh and original angle, which is this meta take of kind of deconstructing the found footage subgenre. This movie is hyper aware that you know the tropes of the found footage subgenre, how it doesn't tend to hold water, how people tend to not believe them anymore. You don't fool anybody with these found footage tropes anymore. And it's really leveraging that to make its story feel different from the standard found footage slash mockumentary movie to its strength. It's really probably the most fresh and original part of this movie. And it really surprised me because for the first 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, it feels like a rote found footage movie or a mockumentary that's really just not doing it that well. And I was kind of out, man. Like the first 10 minutes or so, I was kind of like, this feels really derivative. I mean, there's a scene in the movie where they're interviewing, the original filmmakers are interviewing people around town about this creature, Peeping Tom, this myth. And they're all talking about, oh, yeah, so and so died about this and this and that. And it's straight out of the Blair Witch Project. That scene is straight out of the Blair Witch Project, down to the fact where I think I even saw one of the same actors in it, but I'm not sure about that. But I was just like, this is such a derivative movie, and it wants you to think that because it's about to turn things on its head, which it does 10, 12 minutes, maybe 15 minutes into it, and it suddenly got me. At that point, I was really engaged because this idea that what we're watching is not somebody recreating or finishing the footage that these original filmmakers who have disappeared apparently had tried to put together, but rather we're watching a documentary about somebody doing that and questioning his motives. And that was fresh to me. That was a nice take on it because it's a layered meta take. We've seen the meta take in these found footage movies many times. It's not a super unique idea, but this was meta on top of meta on top of meta, and then arguably even on top of meta. You know, you had the original filmmakers who had disappeared and their footage had been left behind, had been found, literally just kind of found like under a radiator. And then you've got this new filmmaker who's putting this film together, kind of making it his own film, and we don't really trust his motives, and that's cool. And then you've got the filmmakers whose film you're actually watching, who are exploring this filmmaker and questioning his motives and the veracity of what he's saying, and would he have a reason to fake all of this? Would the original filmmakers have had reason to fake all this, or is it all in their heads? There's a lot of different questions being asked here that made this a lot more intriguing, a lot more fun. And then on top of it, movies like the Blair Witch Project exist in the world of this movie, and the question of whether or not they're just kind of being derivative of movies like that gets hit front and center, but more on that in just a few minutes. Like I said, this movie does a really good job of bringing something fresh to both found footage and the mockumentary subgenres. Mockumentary because it's designed to be like a documentary that we're watching, but it also has a very heavy found footage component into it because it's the topic of conversation. The main plot point is this found footage, so it's really doing a good job of borrowing from both of those subgenres, so it would be equally applicable to either subgenre. You could put it in either one, but it's done a really good job of blending this together without being confusing. You never are not able to follow what's going on, even with these multiple layers. This English trifle of meta-ness, if you will. There's no problem in following the story and what's going on. They did a good job of keeping everything clear. It's the biggest strength of the movie. It's what makes it seem set apart from others, and it's what made me not quit on the movie. I was really kind of out of it in the first 10 minutes, and then it just sucked me right in. And that's great. That's a great thing to draw me in, especially for a movie that has every reason to be kind of rote and kind of predictable, and it didn't wind up being predictable. And that made me very, very happy when I was watching it. The multiple meta angle is not the only fresh or original thing being brought to the screen here in this movie. Some of the other things I really liked about this was that the protagonist, and I use the word loosely, the main guy in the film, the filmmaker who's reassembling the found footage of the original filmmakers, is really unlikable in the movie. He's just an off-putting guy. He's kind of got an attitude, and as the mockumentary goes on, you're finding out more and more about his backstory, and it really gives him questionable motives. You really start to doubt him. He's kind of your narrator, and he's a very unreliable narrator, which I tend to love those kind of stories. You start questioning every bit of his story, really, whether or not he's telling the truth. He definitely has motivation for lying and trying to make this into something. And you see the stress he gets or that he feels when people don't believe him or when they push back and question him. You see that that story of his start to unravel, that veneer of his start to shake, and it's actually pretty fun. It's a really fun thing to have your main character be somebody you kind of don't like, and that actually winds up playing into the movie as a plot point. That's kind of cool. I also liked how it starts with some footage from the original filmmakers, and it really sets up the mystery right off the top, where she's literally instructing whoever finds this to edit her movie to put the footage at the beginning and at the end. And you know that means something really weird and bad is going to end up at the end of the movie. And they really just like put that, kind of Chekhov's video clip right at the front of the movie. That was a fun idea. I also liked that they created their own monster for this. They decided to create something wholly new, a new original, legend or myth in the Peeping Tom character. This idea of a monster that you conjure by staring into a tunnel without blinking for like an hour, and then if you do that, then you see him, and then every time you blink, he gets closer and closer until eventually he kills you. Great idea. More on that in a second, though, because like I said, every good thing about this movie kind of also has a bad thing about this movie that ties into it. So we'll put a pin in that for a second. And then the other thing I like is the idea or the ties to the Blair Witch Project, which at first I thought was going to be a very big detriment to this movie, but it actually winds up being also a very big strength of the movie because, the Peeping Tom entity was, created for this movie just like the Blair Witch was created for Blair Witch Project. And this movie knows it. Again, it's really mining Blair Witch and other movies too, but especially Blair Witch. And it knows it so much so that they brought in Eduardo Sanchez, the co-director of Blair Witch Project, to be in the movie and called this movie out for being derivative. And that's absolutely hysterical. It's one of my favorite parts of the movie. It's really a clever idea to call out the similarities to Blair Witch and just kind of own up to it and make it part of the story's plot. The fact that this is a derivative, the fact that you've got this filmmaker who's kind of unscrupulous and might be kind of trying to rip things off, both ripping off the original filmmakers and maybe ripping off Eduardo Sanchez, is great. That's great stuff. I love it. But again, the good Lord giveth, the good Lord taketh away. When we're going to get into all that. In fact, why don't we dig into that? The nitpicks I have with this movie. One of them is exactly what I'm talking about, is that, they keep alluding to other movies, especially Blair Witch Project, which are better movies, and so you're always running the risk of, making a viewer go, man, I really would just be watching that better movie. The same thing with the Peeping Tom character. He's an original character, kind of like the Blair Witch, and so that's great. And he is an interesting concept, but the problem is that when you have this monster that every time you blink, he gets closer to killing you, that's a little too powerful. And the creature it reminded me of was not actually the Blair Witch, but the Bye Bye Man, which is not a good thing. Because it's the same idea where, it's the Bye Bye Man who's like, the monster, if you think about him, he kills you. Well, how do you just not think about him? It's like, that's kind of an implausible scenario. And the same thing with the Peeping Tom character, or the monster, where if you blink, he gets closer and closer to you, he kills you. How do you not blink? It's like a little too easy for the monster to get you in that sense. It's not like Freddy Krueger where like you can actually try to stay awake for a long period of time. Try to not blink and see how long you last. It's not long. So that monster would get you pretty quick. Other things that I had a bit of an issue with are admittedly nitpicky stuff. The acting isn't super great. I'd actually say that Eric Christopher Myers and then people playing the documentary filmmakers that are making this particular movie, they were good. I actually thought they were quite good and believable. Your main guy, he's not solid. He's not bad. And I think that part of the performance lends to you not liking him. So because he feels a little inauthentic, and I think that's kind of the point. So I kind of give him a little bit of pass. The original filmmakers also kind of feel a little fake. Now, I'm saying this is a nitpick because, you want it to feel authentic and real. There's an argument to be made that this is kind of intentional because there's an aspect of this movie of whether or not these people are actually being fake, that they're not being genuine. And so when you look at it that way, maybe they're actually excellent performances, but because, and I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but the way the movie goes, I kind of feel like this is actually just them not really nailing the acting and less them trying to be really clever about how meta this is, and they're actually not supposed to be the best of actors, because I feel like that would make it a little too easy, a little too obvious. So I do think the acting is maybe falling a little short, but I might be wrong on that. Feel free to debate me out about that in the comments below if you've seen the movie, because that one I'm not too sure about. Again, I'm being nitpicky here. These are nitpicks. And then, while we're at it, let me just call it out. Butterfly Kisses, terrible title for a movie. I get what they are, I guess, it's like the thing with the eyelashes, but all I could think about was that stupid Bob Carlyle song, that country pop song from the 90s that's god awful that I had successfully buried and forgotten about until I saw the title of this movie. So thanks for that, Sarah. But and again, I'm nitpicking, and that's a good thing because if I have to nitpick to criticize this movie, that means overall it's pretty good, man. Like there's these things are for the most part not too big a deal. Like it has some of the standard found footage slash well, found footage tropes in the sense that there's footage of people having these private conversations, and it's like, why in the world would you be filming this conversation? Like, what purpose would you have for setting a camera up on a table and filming you guys have this argument or whatever? And that's in so many found footage movies, so you're inclined to forgive it. However, since this movie is set up like a mockumentary, I kind of held it against it a little bit more because with a mockumentary, you can explain why somebody's being filmed having a conversation. You can just literally have it that one of them was interviewing the other one, and then they left the camera on and started having this conversation that wasn't meant to be on camera. Easy. I just fixed it. So could have been tightened up a little bit. Yes, it could have. There's a lot of things about this movie that could have been tightened up, and a lot of the problems, and I use the word in quotes, problems about the movie stem from the strengths of the problems. You have an unlikable narrator that makes it questionable, and the actor is not really nailing the role, but maybe he's not supposed to be. That kind of thing. It's like it's a cool idea to have this unlikable narrator, but it's also shaky acting. But is it supposed to be shaky acting? I like that. You've got a fresh, original, kind of creepy idea for a new monster, but it also maybe kind of feels a little bit like the Bye Bye Man. And so it's a weird thing to put this movie under scrutiny because everything that I name as a strength, I can also name as a weakness, which I can also name as a strength. It's really kind of a wonderful dichotomy for me to kind of suss out and figure out. Does it make it syllabus worthy? Does the good outweigh the bad? Are the strengths more strengths? Or are they really more weaknesses? Let's find out now. So it's time to ask the question, is it syllabus worthy? And the answer is maybe as an extra credit. Maybe as an extra credit for like the mockumentary subgenre, possibly the found footage subgenre, but probably more the mockumentary because it's really more mockumentary than found footage. But I say maybe extra credit because this movie's no Lake Mungo. It's no Savage Land. It's not really hitting the upper echelon of mockumentary movies or found footage movies for that matter. It's no Blair Witch. Like I said, it's reminding you of Blair Witch. It's literally telling you that it's derivative of Blair Witch. It's telling you this, but it's not achieving that same level. Even though I really love the multiple meta layers of this, it's really to me the crowning jewel in this movie, and it's what sets it apart, and that's why I'd say I'd probably want to mention this as an extra credit because it's definitely worth mentioning for that reason alone. I do wish it had used the mockumentary style more to its advantage. Like I noted earlier, by like doing more interview type stuff, it really didn't use that to its advantage as well, and it relied a little too much on the found footage aspect of it and less on the mockumentary. That might have been a bit of a mistake. It is a very fresh and original idea to me. At least it feels to me. Like, yeah, meta's not that fresh, but this much meta, especially the Blair Witch part, that really hit for me. But there are the nits, and the nits kind of bring it down a little bit. There we didn't get into this too much, but there are some plot questions in here too. There's some issues where they talk about like certain characters, they can't track them down, but then they talk about how they were able to find information about them. And unless I missed it, and let me know in the comments below if I did, I don't think that's ever explained how they knew about that. So like there's like little things like that, which again, you'll let them go because you're having a good time. But when you're talking about whether or not they're going to be able to displace something like Lake Mungo, that it's going to be what makes you miss the mark just a little bit. Again, nitpicks. These are not big deals. It's just there's better, more famous found footage movies. This one is, from what I understand, not the biggest or most well known, and that's a shame. And that's where an extra credit movie makes sense because you'd want to shine a light on it and give it some exposure, let people know about it because it doesn't seem like it's getting enough love, and it's definitely not. But is it as good as some of these other movies that I've talked about before? No, but it's definitely good. I really like this movie, and if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out and let me know what you think because and stick with it. Give it a good 10-15 minutes at least, and if it doesn't draw you in, it doesn't draw you in because not everybody's tastes are the same. But for me, the meta stuff was great. I really liked the concept. I liked the monster idea, even if it is kind of like the Bye Bye Man. All of that was working for me really well, and these these negative things about it, they're not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. They're enough to keep it from making the syllabus proper, but they're not enough to make me say anything about this movie being unwatchable or bad or not worth your time. Quite the opposite. Definitely worth your time. Definitely watchable. Definitely good. And if you like found footage or mockumentary, you're going to have a really, really good time with this one. So those are my thoughts on Butterfly Kisses, which I really wish had a different title. I guess you can't call it Peeping Tom because of obvious reasons, but that would have been a better title. Anyways, I'm harping on the title. That if that's as bad as I can talk about it, gives you a good idea about how good the movie actually is. But enough about that. Now it's time to get into a horror trivia pursuit card and see if I can answer a question live on camera without cutting and cheating, if you will. And so because we're talking about a new monster in Peeping Tom, let's go with the monster category on the card. Here's the question. In 1979's Alien, what is the designation of the planetoid upon which the Nostromo finds the derelict spacecraft? Fantastic. Because not only do I know the answer to this question, but because it's actually a pretty hard question. I feel like the last couple of cards we've gotten some softball type questions or like some, either or questions, 50-50 type questions where you're just kind of guessing, kind of like it's either A or B, and you're just guessing between the two, which are not tremendously fun or tremendously difficult. You have always at least a 50% chance of getting those. So I'm glad to see a card that's about a big famous movie, but not the easiest question to answer. Now, I do know the answer to this question, but I'll be honest with you. I know it from the sequel Aliens, which is a little bit of a hint for those of you who are fans of those movies. And I'm a big fan of those movies. I've talked about both of those on the channel here. I love the franchise. I'm really into it. And so I know this question, but I'd say this answer comes more from Aliens. It's more of an obvious answer in Aliens than it is in Alien. And so I think that's an interesting thing because they're saying from Alien, what is the designation of this planetoid? And I don't know if I just seen Alien, I'm not sure I would have gotten the answer to this. It would be very hard. But Aliens, it's very prominent. So that's a bit of a hint to you if you guys have seen the movies. I'm not going to prattle on too long. I'm trying to give you a little bit of time to think about it. And I think it's been a while since I've read the novelization for Aliens, but I think in Aliens, they actually give them the planet a name. And I don't want to say because I think I remember the name, but I get off of that because that's not the answer they're looking for. They're asking for the designation, not the name, which tomato, tomato. But I'm pretty sure I have not turned over the card yet. I don't know what the answer the card says yet, but I'm pretty sure they're not looking for the name. They're looking for the designation, and that the novel arguably not canon anyways, and I'm like 98% sure that the name of the planet is never mentioned in the movies. But okay, I've prattled on long enough about this. Either you got your answer locked in or you got to lock in the next 5 seconds because I'm about to answer. And my answer to this question is, of course, LV-426. LV-426 is the name, the designation of the planetoid. But let's see if the card agrees with me. LV-426, that's it right there. And actually, as I'm recording this, Alien Day is coming up, April 26th, 426, which is an easy way to remember this. Yeah, that is the designation of the planet they talk about. They say that over and over again in Aliens. And I think in the novelization, they call it like Akron or something like that. If you guys have read that, remind me in the comments down below because I don't feel like rereading the book or looking it up. Let me know in the comments below if you remember if they named the planet in the book. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys got it right. I did. Easy one for me because I love those movies, but not necessarily the easiest question. I'm thrilled to get questions that are a little more challenging again. So let me know what you answered if you did not answer LV-426. If you answered Akron or something else, let me know. I want to hear what your answers were in the comments below. But for now, we're going to go ahead and wrap this video up. Thank you very much for hanging out, talking about Butterfly Kisses. Thank you very much to Sarah for the recommendation. And for the rest of you, leave your recommendations in the comments below. What movies should I be checking out that I haven't seen already? Anything I haven't seen, I added on the list. And don't let Sarah have all the fun. She's been giving me great recommendations, but she doesn't have to be the only one. You guys can do it too. Don't let her beat you. Anyways, let's go ahead and call it for now. Next week, we'll be back with something completely different. But until then, class dismissed.